2000 was the year when the United Nations had the Millennium Declaration. This meant that the Millennium Development Goals were put into place. They went up to the year 2015, but as of the year 2015, we know that there was a new Agenda 2013 that was adopted by the United Nations. What this means is that all member states are, well, you would say, have an obligation towards realizing this agenda, which came in with the Sustainable Development Goals. We know that there are about 17. So today we are here to evaluate that does Uganda, being a signatory to the United Nations, has it religiously followed up or lived to its end of the bargain in terms of realizing and establishing the successful implementation of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. But also, why did we move away from the Millennium Development Goals, among other questions that we are here to answer and evaluate. Of course, the Youth Roundtable looks out for the cream of the la cream to help us understand some of these conversations. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode of the Youth Roundtable, and I shall introduce our panelists for today straight away. I won't follow the usual order that I usually follow. Let me begin from round robin. I'll begin from the center today. The first panelist that I'll introduce to you is making his maiden appearance by the names Aijuka Allan. Allan is a law student at Makerere University, and I know that he has interests around this particular conversation. Allan, you're most welcome. Feel free to say hello to our viewers.
Thank you so much, Comrade Kidega. Good afternoon, our viewers. I'm glad to be part of this show and to be part of this panel. And I hope that by the end of all this, we'll have learned something new, and for the sake of our future, Agenda 2030, and for the sake of our country. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad that you are already drawing us to look at the future. I think that is where this conversation is going to center its discussion. Next to Allan is a friend of ours, also making a maiden appearance, Princess Inshuti. Inshuti is the Deputy Youth Ambassador of Uganda to the ESE.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah, it's correct.
Okay. Thank you for joining us, Inshuti.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Okay. You want to say hello to the viewers?
Yes, I'm excited to be here, and I hope today we are able to learn from each other something about the development goals and how we can be able to achieve them together.
Yeah, thank you. The key word for me is together. If we hold our hands, then we can definitely be able to achieve some of these very good agendas. The third panelist, still someone making a maiden appearance, my old-time friend, Brandon Katura. Brandon, many thanks for joining us. Brandon is a member of the Uganda Olympic Committee in sport, right? Working in about 5 districts in Uganda.
Yeah.
Brandon, many thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Moses, for hosting us. Good evening, viewers, and we are very excited to be here.
Yeah, let's keep the excitement coming. The fourth panelist on the show is Mirembe Ritah. I was about to say Ruth. Mirembe Ritah. Ritah is a student of human resource management at Makerere University Business School.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. A good evening to you all. I'm glad to meet all of you. I'm ready to learn, to unlearn, to share together.
That's clearly your open-minded. You've come here with an open mind.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Well, just to bring the news, I know it might not be so late, but yeah, just to inform our viewers that our neighbors in Kenya are, advancing towards the August elections, and in that regard, the Azimio La Umoja Alliance announced Martha Karua as the running mate to, of course, Raila Odinga. We also know that the Kwanza Kenya Alliance announced still this week Rigathi Gachagua as the running mate to William Samoei Ruto. That is just for your own consumption. But today we shall focus on the SDGs. Let me begin with you, Allan. You're the student on the panel, and students, the culture of reading widely is still embedded in you. So, just I gave a snippet of the background of how we moved from the Millennium Development Goals to the SDGs, but I only touched the surface. For the benefit of the viewer out there who doesn't know what the SDGs are, how did they come into place? Was it a United Nations resolution, or it was just people who came up and said, okay, you know what, now we have this program. What is the background? How do we find ourselves having to implement these 19 very good, points, by the way, if I'm to say. So just kick us off.
Well, thank you very much. To begin with, there's something we must understand, that the world, as people say, is now a global village.
That's true.
And by the time Uganda got independence, the issue of globalization and people interconnecting and meeting together had started to take shape. So prior to that, we had the World War, and people fought here and there, and they started to come together. Countries came together, having the United Nations by the end of the World War. But subsequently, we had the Cold War.
Yeah.
Cold War. So meaning there are still misunderstandings between different states.
Yeah.
And then came 1962, a country got independence. How did Uganda come to the United Nations? United Nations was started by basically European states. Those were the days.
The League of Nations.
Yeah, the League of Nations. And those were the days African states were still colonized.
Yeah.
And remember, Ghana, was it Ghana?
Ghana.
Yeah, 1957.
57,
Yeah, it got independence first. So Uganda getting independence, 1962, it also had an opportunity to join, the global village in a sense of, coming together in governance, coming together in policies, coming together in security, coming together in solving problems. So in the same year, 1962, it was 25th December, these countries came, Uganda, it was October, 25th October, Uganda joined the United Nations. It was admitted as a sovereign state. And that's when you find Uganda part of the United Nations. So subsequently, the world problems didn't end. The world continued to face problems. Uganda in particular, we had hunger, diseases came in afterwards. We had HIV, and those days poverty was at a high rate. Countries were struggling to build economies, right from colonialism. Some had a history of slavery. So on that basis, the heads of state that had now merged to around 191 were starting to think, what can we do? So by 1997, under the chairmanship of Kofi Annan, so the United Nations decided to take shape. They wanted to solve human problems. So like you said, in the Millennium Declaration, Kofi Annan made suggestion of 8 particular development goals. We can call them, but they were later called Millennium Development Goals in 2000, and that's when they were enacted and taken up. So these were they tried to apply them, but they were criticized on the basis of having not done prior research. Some people were saying that this was work of one person who just sat down and made a report and a recommendation.
And the person being?
Yeah, Kofi Annan in his report. So in their opinion, there was a need to have something that is, broad-based and groomed from within the people. They make the suggestions. So they decided to adopt them because they are a bit of detail themselves. They cover the problems of them, including poverty, hunger, the wars then. They wanted to create peace. They wanted to create, some kind of a relationship between states. When you look at the 8th point, the eighth Millennium Goal, they also looked at wars. Coups were starting to come up in different... Uganda in particular, if you look at the years then, after Obote's regime, 1966, after he had, tampered with the constitution, Amin came in, the man he had used. Subsequently, other leaders came in. Now we had Museveni by the time of the Millennium Development Goals, who is still here. So by 2015, it was called Agenda 2015. That's how it was adopted. And under Agenda 2015, that's when we had Millennium Development Goals. Agenda 2015, they were targets they were supposed to hit. And these targets were shown in the Millennium Development Goals. So by the end of 2015, they realized that we haven't actually achieved all of them. You can make a plan as a human being, but there are, should we call them, there are factors that you do not predict, and predictabilities have to be there. So particularly, financing. There was a time in 2005 when the United Nations decided to, can call it forgiving for the sake of our viewers, some low developed countries. The recent show you're talking about the weak economies, and we are trying to nurse the word about Uganda. But they decided to forgive particularly those that were weak and were grappling with payments, so that those people would use the funds that were supposed to pay loans to finance these Millennium Development Goals. And but Uganda, I think it was a beneficiary then.
That was which year?
That was 2005. So in 2015, towards the end and the time they're supposed to evaluate if the Millennium Development Goals had yielded, they had to have another plan for the coming years, for the future. The World Sustainable Development Goals came into the picture. That was the time when Sam Kutesa was the chair. So Uganda has a hand in the Sustainable Development Goals, in a sense that the time the Sustainable Goals were adopted.
For the benefit of our viewers,
Yes.
he was chairing what exactly?
The United Nations.
Okay.
Yeah. So that time they had a conference, bit of similar to what they discussed in 2000, and looked at what can we do in the coming years for the sake of our future generation.
Yeah, and let me just pick it up from there. Princess Inshuti, Allan does justice in terms of, explaining the Millennium Development Goals. Let me just pick it up from where you stopped. What is your own perspective regarding the historical development of how we find ourselves having sustainable development goals? He has done well in terms of the Millennium Development Goals. Let us just hear it from your own perspective.
So I believe, first of all, the Millennium Development Goals, I wouldn't say they were not necessary. They were necessary, yes, but over time it comes to a realization that maybe there's a little of the things that are necessary or mostly important in the world that we are living in today that they missed out at that time. So I believe after realization that there's a lot that they missed out with the 8 Millennium Development Goals, they had to come to sit down and come up with goals that would meet the daily changing structure of the lifestyle of the people today, the youth especially as well. So the Sustainable Development Goals are basically, they're aimed at meeting the needs of the current generation without compromising future generations to meet their own needs. So that means they were created so that, for example, I'll give an example of goal number 5, which aims at gender equality. I think even one of the Millennium Goals had that, but it didn't have as much emphasis or details as the Sustainable Development Goals have today. So the Sustainable Development Goals are like a better version of the Millennium Goals and it's more broken down than the Millennium Goals. And they're based on 3 pillars, the environment, the society pillar, and the economy. So each of the goals, there's like five goals under the 3 pillars. For example, under the environmental aspect of the pillars is Sustainable Development Goal number 13, 14, 15, which has climate action. There's also protection for life on land and protection for life under water and the seas. So yes, the development goals that we see today under Sustainable Development Goals are more open to addressing more of protecting resources, because the first goals didn't really look at that as much as the goals today look at it. So yes, the Sustainable Development Goals are bigger and more incorporating than the first ones.
Okay, amazing. I am glad that you emphasize the issue around sustainability. And I think I have to agree with you partly because, I think the MDGs focused more on let us, maybe develop.
Yeah, on pushing the economical part of it than any other.
Yes, and I think that skipped the aspect of how can we, because this development will need resources. They will need both renewable and non-renewable resources.
Yes.
I think what the MDGs had missed was the aspect of the non-renewable resources, that how can we protect them for even the future generations. And I'm glad that you've done justice in terms of, explaining that. Brandon, the two, Princess attempts to, draw a distinction between the two, that the MDGs, yes, whereas they were good, but they were not very detailed, they were covering broad-based issues, But then the SDGs come along and are trying to break down the issue by issue, and I think that's why they're actually more in number. So, your own view, do you think that the SDGs are any different from the Millennium Development Goals? But if there is a difference, then what is the niche being added with the SDGs?
Yeah, I think that the SDGs are very different in the sense that they are more inclusive in terms of the areas that are are looked at in terms of impact, but also to say that they seem to project a world where we still have the ability to manage the resources that we have. I think, like you've just alluded to, is that the MDGs sort of were looking at, especially social problems. I think at the time you had things like mortality, like, infant mortality, we're fighting HIV. So in that perspective, in that sense, at the time, that is what we are fighting. So, but today, we no longer have many people dying under the age of 5, for example, because of the killer diseases, because you have things like immunization that have happened. So now it meant that their relevance sort of, after that, they didn't have that much relevance. So today, I think when you look at the SDGs being more detailed, I think in that sense is that they give us the what next in terms of our capacity as a world and how we are going to be able to implement this transition. So for me, I appreciate that. But also secondly, it is to show that they show the interaction between the stakeholders. I think it's very crucial. When you look at the indicators, it talks about the environment, there's a social aspect, which is human activities, then you have the economic aspect. And I think also people need to appreciate that these things go hand in hand. For you to say that something is sustainable, it has to be environmentally viable, it should make economic sense, and socially okay. So if you woke up and said you're going to construct a road, for example, the express, but then you put it in a swamp, then you have an issue there. Yeah. Or if you had to displace people, for example, then we have a social issue in terms of movement. Yeah. That method cannot be deemed sustainable. So I think it also gave us an idea of getting something that works for all of us, unlike some of us. So I think even when governments are making interventions, now they need to know that if I'm doing this, for example, if you've seen, is it Friends of Zoka, all these activist groups that are coming up to show that like man feeds off the environment also feeds off man's activities. So we are sort of like in this ecosystem now, and I think the SDGs show us that we are in one ecosystem. And also to show that what I do does not just impact Uganda, but will also impact other neighboring countries. Because when you have food scarcity here, Rwanda is going to have an issue. Yeah. Or maybe Kenya, where I export maybe maize, for example, will have an issue. So I think it has made us appreciate the fact that our actions or inactions cannot just be our consequence, but can also be a consequence of others. So for me, I feel like we are now getting at that stage where we are viewing the world like Allan said, in that global perspective to understand. And I think that's like one of the key things for me that I appreciate from the 17 that are developed, which is also that, and I think 17 also being key, which is partnership for the goals. I think that was not addressed in the first part, because now SDGs are telling us, how do you make sure you deliver? So if it's a young people thing, you're like, okay, I'll partner with the National Youth Council to do advocacy. If it is women-related issues, for example, can I partner with the civil society, government, private sector? And I think Goal 17 clearly stipulates the issue of partnerships, which I think was not alluded to in the first place. I think the emphasis was on government in the 2000s, but now you can see that every stakeholder sort of has a role to deliver, whether it's media, education institutions, religious institutions, cultural institutions. So they talk about partnerships, which I think is another key defining element for me, in my opinion.
Wow, amazing. Ritah, it would only be fair that I give you a chance to also let us know what your opinion is regarding the Millennium Development Goals versus the SDGs that we have today. What's your own take?
Oh, in my own take, well, you talked about resources. But when you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, in my opinion, they look at Africa, the problems in Africa. Because when you look at SDG number 4, quality education, yes, quality education. Education is basically the it's the backbone of every nation. When you look at Africa as a state, when you look at Uganda as a state, education is literally the background of every nation, and without a strategic education system, obviously, we wouldn't see a nation growing, because it is the backbone. So in my opinion, I feel like these sustainable development goals are more of a nature of the entire country, of the entire nation, and the world at large, because these are basic issues that we are going to find today and issues we are going to look at tomorrow. They don't focus on the problems that we have only right now, but they also look at the developments we shall have ahead. So I believe that these sustainable development goals are actual actual aims and objectives that we can actually look at with time to come, because with time to come the future is digital, obviously. So we are looking at technological advancements like with time to come, and this is actually talked about in the Sustainable Development Goals. So the Sustainable Development Goals are the now and tomorrow of the world at large.
Wow, thank you. Allan, let me come to you, and I'm going to find it hard to phrase my question to you because of many reasons. Because my question is one that attempts to indict the Western world. But it is then challenged by the fact that at the time when the MDGs were being put in place, it was an African man at the helm of the United Nations. But I think scholars of law, you've addressed your mind to the fact that, the aspect of neocolonialism, okay? Yeah. And I'm not trying to rubbish the SDGs or the MDGs, no.
Yeah.
The points are actually very good. But do you think that in your own perspective, this is where the Western world brings a handshake to us, but when at the back of it all, at the backhand, there is a rock, shake your hand, then crush your head with a rock. Yeah. Because if you look at the time when the time when the MDGs came to place in 2000, it was just a couple of years before we had the structural adjustment programs. And if you recall, the conditions under the structural adjustment programs, they encouraged the borrowing. Yeah. They encouraged African states to actually borrow money to meet whatever development agendas they had. So now, after forcing us to borrow or after luring us to borrow, then now they say, oh, no, guys, now we have a Millennium Development Plan. Okay? But let's not forget so quick that the Western world industrialized heavily in their early 90s. They industrialized. Then now that African countries have begun to discover their natural resources, they're saying, no, don't actually exploit those resources. We need to move towards renewable energy and all these things because of climate change and all this. Do you think this is an aspect of neocolonialism?
Recently on Twitter, there was an activist in France that was prompting the president of France to fight against the East African oil pipeline, something like that. East African Community oil pipeline from our own oil.
Wow.
When you say that the aspect of neocolonialism, yes, I will not outrightly say that it was the direct agenda because it is not expressed in the SDGs or MDGs.
Of course, they are not going to put it there that are bringing these documents to.
But considering our history,
yes.
Even right after independence, the Queen herself remained with a hand in Uganda. What does it show? It was a time after Cold War. It was a time after economic, challenge.
Recession, yeah.
We remember the time when Apollo Milton Obote tried to move to the left. And what happened in Uganda, which I wouldn't wish to overly explain. And this should, in your mind, should remind you that, well, some people call them pace setters. When someone is racing, there's always a pace setter.
Yeah.
And they feel like we need them. We need this person to guide us, this nation to guide us. But in my opinion, like you said, neocolonialism cannot be something we can rule out in any society. Question of globalization, it means some countries will come and their intentions cannot be expressed in what they are bringing to you. So if Kofi Annan brought the first MDGs, and the criticism was that they are not groomed or brought about by different nations, they just sat and made an assessment. But the SDGs were assessed from different countries. It was wide research. One, they knew that the MDGs were coming to an end. And there was a need for a plan that would follow. So in my opinion, the question of neocolonialism should never be ruled out. But the question of neocolonialism in a country like Uganda can only be mitigated by its leaders. In implementation of SDGs, we can say we are already in a trap of having to borrow, having to pay back. As I explained at the start, there's a time when they realize that some states will never pay back. So they have to waive off the debts and say, okay, you can give up paying this and then you can cover up. But all in all, neocolonialism is an aspect that you cannot establish. You cannot establish by any research because it's underlying. No one will bring it direct.
Directly, yeah.
Because that's why it's called neo-colonialism. And the purpose, you can only establish neo-colonialism by what is happening and the results of what you're doing. Are the results of SDGs showing that the benefits are going back to the West, or we are benefiting? If we are benefiting from the SDGs, it means their agenda is not neo-colonialism. But if we are not benefiting, someone else is benefiting, then...
Okay, thank you. Fair enough. And I believe that's because you addressed your mind for example, how the 1900 Uganda Agreement came into place.
Yeah.
You know, there was this whole narrative of we are here to protect you. You know, we are here to, you know, but yet in fact their actual interest was to like deplete our resources and things like that. So, and I am not accusing the SDGs in this case, but all I'm saying is let's trigger our minds to think broadly. And Princess, I'll just pick up from the question that he posed. Are the benefits to us or they are going elsewhere? The benefits of these SDGs as and 17 as they are, no poverty, zero hunger, all that. Do you think they largely benefit the ordinary Ugandan? Or you think that, you know, aspects like let us address climate change, and we saw the COP26 resolution, one of which was that we must move towards renewable energies, you know, and leave out the fossils and things like that. Do you think that largely these SDGs are benefiting the ordinary Ugandan, or, you know, there's some aspects that benefit the Western world?
I think we need to first start with, you see the order of the SDGs, it starts with no poverty. So it means it's starting with the lowest person, like the last person that's at the bottom. That should be the first person whose problems we address. So it means if we are able to start with goal number 1 and achieve it, if you can achieve no poverty in your country or in a country, you will be able to achieve the rest of the goals that come along.
No, the question is, what is poverty? Yeah.
So poverty is definitely, it's not being able to meet the basic needs of life. That means water, shelter, food, and things like that. And yes, there's still certain places within our countries.
So I've seen that my grandmother who lives in the village in Gulu, because she has access to water, she can go and farm and get food, so she's not poor.
She's not poor. If she can afford to meet her basic needs, she's not poor.
She's not poor.
Yeah.
Banu, do you agree with that?
No, I don't entirely agree with that, because affordability, I think, brings in context of money, the ability to afford, so housing, the purchasing power. So if you're saying you are next to a river, you don't necessarily have to pay to buy water, but it doesn't mean that then you are you have access to water, therefore you're not poor. I think it brings in the aspect of spending. I think the international metric, I think by UN standard, is how much you spend on a daily basis. So usually to be ranked poor is that you're very depleted in your spending.
You spend less than $1.
Yeah, it's not about the natural resources, because now when you talk about people who have these things around them, it is like you accessed somewhere. But if in terms of spending, if you're not really spending to meet these things, then you could technically still be considered to be poor.
Yeah, Princess, let me come back to you. And you make a valid point that for as long as, from where I'm seated, I can, because development, there is human development, but there's also the infrastructure development.
And human development is the first step of development.
Yes, it is key. Because to me, agenda number 1, if you look at it in detail, it's actually about development.
Yes.
No poverty, because how else are you going to achieve no poverty? You know, develop infrastructure, you know, I mean, there are things you must do to get people out of poverty. Okay, so these things require you to spend money, actually, to put up the roads and all that. So you make a good point that my grandmother, who is in the village, might define her own
shelter,
poverty,
housing, food.
Yes,
she can basic needs.
Yes.
Those are the first. They're the first things. They're starting point. If you don't have food, you don't have where to stay. That's rock bottom.
Yeah.
That's like where someone now has to look for where someone has to stay. They have to provide for you food. It's different when you have land, you have a house, you can dig and get food. At least there, the level that the government would get involved is, okay, now we need to empower the people to know that they can start businesses with their farms, with what they have. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Brandon, I had brought you earlier on just to create a debate between the two of you, but let me just take you to goal number 8, which, and ideally most of these goals offside, they're actually very good, statements. And agenda 8, decent work and economic growth. We know that Uganda has no minimum wage bill. And the president, I listened to his explanation. He said that you cannot be able to attract investment if the cost of labor is high. Okay, so why have a country where there is a minimum wage bill? Are you going to then attract investors into the country when the labor cost is actually very high? So his argument was that I can't assent to this bill because it will discourage foreign investment. But here they're saying that decent work is actually very important. And to me, decency goes around the conditions under which you work, how much you're being paid, and all those things. So it looks like, I don't know how committed we are as a country in terms of implementing the SDGs, but I think number 8, the first part of decent work. If you go to the ghettos, you can't imagine the kind of work people are doing. People work under inhuman conditions. So what is your view around decent work here in Uganda?
I think we are very far from what we would call decent work, because even the people who are in offices and in SC also have their own issues in terms of their workplace. So even when we all envision to work in some of these top organizations, you find that, for example, even work hours are not favorable. Our colleagues like lawyers and auditors have complained about work hours. You talk about, for example, your work-life balance. How much time do you spend with your family? It's still an issue amongst corporate people in this country. It's still a very big challenge. When you look at accessibility to your workplace, moving from your place of residence to where you work, you still have those transport and infrastructure challenges. There's that issue. Secondly, I think we still have a big challenge with our compliance to regulations. I know government has put up regulations about like safety hazards, safety compliance and what. But when you go and see like the ladies who are working, like in Namave, for example, like at Darling, these guys who do hair products, you look at the consequences of those people after some time, and it's very sad. Secondly, you find that the legal regime does not favor one to seek redress from an establishment that has offended them. So I think it was a couple of years ago about someone in Coca-Cola who had a hearing impediment because of the noise, and they still lost that case because you're fighting multinationals, you're fighting big corporations. So I think we are very far from it, because like you're saying, the old man wants to appease the investor. So how would you sue a guy who has put up a fruit processing thing in Soroti? You understand? So you're fighting against very hard odds, I think, so which is still, so for me, decent work, we are still very far. And I don't personally believe the president's sentiments to say that someone will not come because of that, because I think most of the countries where there's heavy investment, I think they have gone ahead to have a minimum wage. I think someone will come because, for example, of your tax regime, someone will consider electricity, what is the road network,
the market.
I don't think that the first thing as a top-notch investor I'm worried about is, because I am okay paying that minimum wage if I have the market.
Yes.
Or if I notice that your road network across the country is good, I can push my product to the city. So I don't necessarily entirely agree with the president when he says that it would bias people. I think if you created a minimum wage, you would improve on the standard of living. Importantly, increase the purchasing power. So I think any logical investor would want a buffer for the average person in terms of how much they can make. But if you have housemaids who are earning 30,000 in this country, people, like how much that person is supposed to spend in this economy. So I think it would have helped. I think I saw recently, I think Uhuru did something in Kenya about
the 12%.
The 12%. I think it guarantees spending power, and I think any investor would want to say, if there is that kind of system, it means I get more in my pocket and therefore I can spend more. So from the business sense, I would be safer that way than working in a place where there are no laws. Then I pay people poor, and then they can't spend that money. And I think even government needs to have an economy where people are spending. So when you don't have that minimum wage, I think we are still a little bit really far off, like you've said, in terms of delivery.
Amazing. You've done very well in terms of explaining that point. Ritah, do you think if the African Union today sat in Ethiopia, I think Ethiopia is where the headquarters are, do you think if the African heads of state sat today and said, we want to come up with a sustainable development goal document for Africa, do you think it would look the same as this?
I think it would actually almost look the same as it.
Mm.
First of all, I would like to deter the aspect of neocolonialism.
Mm.
Well, you brought in the aspect of neocolonialism in the Sustainable Development Goals, but I believe they actually aren't only centered there. Like, that aspect is not there on a wider scale.
Mm.
If we come to a scale of 100, maybe on a scale, let's say 90 out of 100, it is not the aspect of neocolonialism.
Okay.
Because 193 countries are involved in this Sustainable Development Goal plan. And Sweden actually is the top-notch country that is now taking it on, and they've greatly thrived. So I believe that even if they would still sit down, they would look almost the same, they would look alike, because there are very many issues affecting Africa today that are actually within those Sustainable Development Goals. Let me rank down to Uganda, because we are in Uganda right now. When you look at the National Development Plan, the second one and the third one, okay, apparently the second one came in 2015.
2015.
Yes, it came along with the Sustainable Development Goals. The problem with Uganda is not the lack of policies. We have so many beautiful, I really love to read the structure, because it's a very beautiful structure. Our problem is just implementation to the dot, because 76% of the National Development Plan actually broke down most of the aspects that were in the Sustainable Development Goals. And if at all those, whatever was put there, the boo-boo, PPs, if everything was clearly implemented with the policies and the objectives to the dot, trust me, Uganda would be very far right now. That 76% would actually be covered and would remain with about 30%. Yeah, so I believe that even if they sat down and still tried to contextualize and create, they would still have almost the same goals, because those are the problems affecting us. Poverty. She was talking about the fact that if you're able to access the resources around you, then
Basic needs.
basic resources around you, then you're not poor. Okay, it hit my heart to the core, because that person that you'll find that is able to access the food, able to access the water, that person might not actually have access to a 2,000 shilling note. When you realize that gender equality, I would like to go down there, because I've been there. An area like Awach in Gulu, you'll find that these women are still marginalized. Well, in the urban areas, we are very okay, like we are fine, but down there, the problem is still very big. Like, the society is still rotten. These policies have not been implemented to the dot, but if only they were implemented, I believe that Africa as an entire continent would be very far, because you're trying to tell me that even if they sit down and try to make those policies,
They'll still be the same.
they will still be the same.
Okay,
Like, everything will still be the same.
Fair enough. I love the humor with which you present your points. Allan,
Yes.
goal number 16, peace, justice.
Yeah.
Okay, how should I phrase this? Peace, justice, because the United Nations, yes, whereas it has this resolution, it has no enforcement framework. There is no global army. There is no global police. There is no global, there's the ICC, yes, which is global in nature, but enforcement agencies that are supposed to ensure that these SDGs come into place actually don't exist. So tomorrow, if for example, the United Nations Security Council agreed that maybe Uganda is not doing ABCD or Kenya is not doing ABCDs, and therefore, and they are, what they're doing is causing insecurity or destabilizing peace in the globe, then they have legitimacy to actually impede on the sovereignty of an independent country, because they can say, we are doing this under goal number 16, to maintain peace and justice. So your sovereignty can then become, sovereignty versus the SDGs. Which of the two do you think would take the day? Because if they argue from the point of goal number 16 is established around peace and justice, and what this government is doing contravenes with this particular goal. Therefore, we are going to send there maybe a peacekeeping mission, or we are going to bomb your capital, whatever it is they decide to do. Do you think that sovereignty could be at stake?
No, the legality of sovereignty and SDGs was the agenda 2030 a legal agenda, or it is merely an economic,
Consensus.
social, So you cannot say that someone can base on SDGs to jeopardize another country's sovereignty. It's impossible. However, the setup of United Nations, I don't want to be misquoted.
So does this cut across for all other UN resolutions that the country can choose to or choose not to?
The extent to which they are binding, because each country, has a discretion to ratify those kinds of resolutions.
That's true.
Or to do away with them.
Yeah.
It is just their mandate. So being their mandate, it means if they never wish to have their sovereignty jeopardized, they don't have to ratify them. Having ratified them actually also doesn't mandate another state, not the United. The United Nations currently is a bit funny. Our president of recent was advocating for African nations having a say in the United Nations Security Council. And it's a valid argument, in my opinion, so which I believe if fronted for the sake of, when other people have an influence or a say towards your security, it means you have no contribution. African nations in regard to security, African nations in regard to their sovereignty can at any point can be jeopardized because up there they have nothing to say. But in regard to SDGs, peace, justice, SDG number 16, African states, we must first admit that Africa is Africa. I don't know if you understand that. Africa is Africa. But Africa being Africa in the sense of Africa in leadership should not mandate Africans to rule themselves in a way that is not human. When you talk about peace, someone will immediately think of war. But in my opinion, some people assert, absence of war does not mandate peace. In several countries, now I'll give you an example in Uganda. Someone said that 14 million Ugandans have mental problems. So 14 million Ugandans are actually liable to running mad. So is that peace? So, which literally means that in implementation of SDGs, the countries must look all the way around what brings the peace to the people. If it comes to governance, the question of governance is a bit tricky. If you don't know that in any country, governance plays the biggest role. The decisions that are made, if they were to ratify the SDGs, it was the government to decide that let's adopt these SDGs, let's adopt 76% of them at the beginning of this development plan. So if the governments have a say towards that, it means that even if they decide, to say that we're doing away with the question of peace and justice and constitutionalism, governance had a say. Recently we met, I must say, we met General Mugisha, and this is what he had to say, that governance, if governance is not prioritized and any country prioritizes economy, I'll give an example of Libya. Honestly, Libya at the time of Gaddafi had everything. If people narrate how they would wish to have gone to Libya to work, to have been repatriated, to run to Libya, get jobs, it was a country as if it was not in Africa. Gaddafi freely engaged the country economically and they thrived. But the question was, did they build a sustainable democracy? Did they build a sustainable governance? Go to Tanzania. Nyerere, I think at some point he gave an opinion to Gaddafi that first work on the governance before you run to the economy. The guy ran to the economy. But Tanzania, right now, having worked on governance and built a sense of transition, built a sense of there's some peaceful form of election. However much no man is an island. Mistakes happen. But if our nations look at the question of governance and how much they influence our development and how much they influence our sustainability, if you now run to Ukraine and Russia and you look how a nation is jeopardizing another nation's, sovereignty, now runs back to your question. It's not a question of the United Nations right now, sir. An independent state attacked a different state. If the United Nations...
We have seen the United Nations come up to maybe issue sanctions and things like that. So you don't think those will go far?
The historians would call it a toothless barking bulldog.
Let's just stop there and take a short break. My throat is beginning to feel sore.
Okay.
I think I need to take a glass of water. But I think you make a very valid point, and I think I agree with you, partly because my own view is that what is keeping the world at peace is not the United Nations Security Council, but the mere fact that there is a nuclear weapon, one facing Moscow, then the other facing Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
I think to me that is what is keeping the world at peace and not the UN Security Council. So I think here you make very strong points right there. To our viewers, we hope you are enjoying the conversation. If you have a comment regarding whatever is going on, put that comment on the comment section, but also let us know what you think about this show. But as of now, don't look aside, because once you look aside, you miss the point. See you shortly after this commercial break. Bye. Thank you very much, and we'll be back from that short commercial break, and we hope that you are enjoying our conversation. The Youth Roundtable continues to celebrate each and every single mother. This is your month. To our mothers, we know that you break your backs to ensure that we earn a living, to ensure that we go to school, so we don't take you for granted. To all mothers out there, cheers and continue doing what you're doing. But far from that, let's come back to our conversation for today. Princess, let me come straight to you. Goal number 4 is around quality education. We know for sure that Uganda is still grappling with access to education, leave alone quality, but access to even the bare minimum of education. We are grappling with that. I know that for sure we have, as a matter of fact, we have USE and UPE institutions, but the access is still a matter of question up to today. But also the issue around the privatization of this very important social service sector. If you look at the biggest players today in the education sector are actually the private players. I don't know how many secondary institutions that are government, that are purely USE, that make it to the rankings each time national results are released. So it looks like the private players are actually the biggest players in this very important social service sector. So do you think that Uganda has actually made advancements or progress towards realizing quality education?
I think one thing that we need to first realize is development is a process. It's not something that happens overnight, or that we should expect that because we set the goals in this year, by the end of the year it will have happened. No, it's something that is going to happen progressively. That means whereas they're tackling the issue of access to education, they're also addressing the issue of quality education through the private sector that has schools. I mean, there's a set of standards for a school to actually get, I think, a center number for students to do their national exams there. So the bit of quality education, I think, comes back to UNEB, where they set the curriculums, changing it to a better way that is easier understood by the young people of the generation that is coming, so that they can address the issues they face today, rather than how in the past it has been more theoretical and all. Today it's changing, and I think that's something we should also be thankful for, because there's better change every day that we see this. Then as for access to education, I'll say there's more girls going into schools. The government has really put a lot of emphasis on enrolling girl children in schools in villages.
That's true.
And there's good progress going on there. So I believe quality education will be, once we've reached the level of now everyone has access to education, or a big percentage has access to education, we can now go to the sector of how are we training our teachers that are going to be in the schools training our children. Then there's also the technical aspect of it. So technical education seems to actually be much cheaper than enrolling for higher learning in universities or doing like A-level. So it's also something good to take up because these are skills, they're hand-given skills most of the time. I mean, like hairdressing, cosmetology, and they're in institutes like the Nakawa Vocational Institute. And I think the government is really playing a big role in making sure that such institutes have the capacity to train people that can afford them. But also they've been scholarships for people in villages, especially girl children again, those who have faced gender-based violence, domestic violence, and issues like that. So yeah, it's going to be a process, but yeah, achievable.
Okay. Yes, Allan, I see your hand is up.
You know, there was a picture on media where there's a little kid, and he had, I think it was, she's something like that, apples all around her. And she went biting each apple all around. And the caption was, this is how someone tries out topics before the exam. They want to go and pass. That is part of our curriculum. I use that analogy to illustrate what our curriculum is. Right from P1, I did subjects that I didn't know where I was going. That is you trying to eat the first apple. We went to secondary. I did physics, chemistry, biology. I suffered with math. We came to A-level. I did economics, history, divinity. All those are apples you're trying to test. All that is time you're wasting trying to learn. In my opinion, however much the government has tried to bring in a value-based curriculum, I got a chance in like 3 workshops I attended. I think circumstantially I was there. I was doing some work then around that school. So yes, from the face of it, it is promising. To some extent, you feel we are no longer biting apples. They have reduced them, but they are still apples, many of them.
Okay.
We are still biting apples. So if the government is to to enrich our education system, they must reduce the apples the more. Eat what you want, finish it.
Yeah. Rather than biting many apples
so that you're
and don't
satisfied.
finish
Because at some point you will eat a poisoned one and you don't know where you will end. So our education system, yes, the reformation, we've seen it, it's coming up. But if you find in a generation where the digital era is taking, dominance, but you go to a secondary school, they don't allow you to take a phone, then where are we going? Are you ready to compete with China, where the kids of, you're restricting students from not taking phones, but their age mates are making the phones. So there is a difference. We appreciate the progress, but we demand that the progress be propelled to some level so that we see that we are also on a level of competition. The question of saying that, we are too dependent on other economies, we should give up on a kind of, like we are trying to do, education system that was handed over to us to create clerks, to create what? They were just making tries. Can this person read English? Let's give him the history of their people. Let them love stories. Let's give them this and this. Let them love this. So at the end of it all, he can be something. So if our country is determined to better education system and to achieve that kind of education.
That is quality.
That is quality.
Not quantity.
Not quantity. Not the apples you have touched. How many classes you've gone through. Ask me about the physics I read.
It is
where we apply it in the current course? Archimedes principle. Where?
Nowhere.
So in my opinion,
we should focus on the quality.
In my opinion, reduce the apples, let's eat what we can. Finish.
Okay, fair enough. Ritah, let me come to you. Goal number 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Let's put this into the Ugandan context. Innovation, very, it is music to the ears to many people. But Uganda's current status, or the status quo in Uganda, is that there is a 12% tax on data. Digital platforms like Facebook remain closed. So I don't know if we have interest in agenda or goal number 9, which is meant to encourage or propel innovation. Because how can you propel innovation if you are heavily taxing the biggest medium that is supposed to foster the engine that is supposed to encourage innovation, which is the internet, encouraging research and all that. So I don't know. Do you think we are moving in the right direction regarding innovation?
Well, we cannot move in the right direction regarding innovation if we've ignored education. Why? Because most of these innovators are actually practical students or practical workers. First of all, when you look at the number of vocational institutes in Uganda, it's very minimal and they are lightly empowered. These institutions are not encouraged. When you look at the salaries they pay the facilitators there, they are meager to encourage them to work more. When you look at the fact that there is no minimum salary, minimum wage for these people who go through these institutions, the innovators, that in its sense only discourages them from taking the initiative of joining these vocational institutes. Because let's use the layman's understanding. When someone tells you they're in a vocational institute, the first thing that will come to you is that either it was tuition, they could not go back to the university, or another thing that would come to you is that they failed to go to A level because of their Form 4 results. But if only there is some sort of empowerment to change the ideologies of people, to change the societal views, then innovation can be encouraged in the country itself. When you look at these students, were they students who came up with Akira? Yes, they were students, but it was news for a few months, for a few weeks. We never heard of it again. The electric buses themselves, you'll find there are about 2 or 3 moving around in the city, the serenity of the city. So basically, it comes to the society and the government. So the society needs to play its role to change its mindset, to change its view about vocational institutes, these platforms that encourage people to actually learn these practical skills, to innovate. Because innovation is a skill in itself. Some people are naturally not talented, and you have to first input the skill in them to innovate and create. The future is digital. The future is technology. I'll come back to what you talked about, the tax. Well, this tax wouldn't be bad if there was a reason for it. But we do not see the reason for it. There's so many taxes implied on so many things in the country today, but these monetary facilities, we don't see where the input. That's
so
the
there's
problem.
no accountability.
There is no accountability.
Otherwise, you wouldn't mind paying your.
If there was yes, I wouldn't mind if there was accountability. But trust me, there isn't accountability. And we are not going to blame one person. We are not going to blame governance on one person because
society has a role.
Yes, society has a role to play because society is where these leaders come from.
That's true.
Society is where these leaders come from. If only society also changed its ideologies and trains sacrificial people, people who will not only look at I have
but
to feed
also
my family.
Isn't society shaped by circumstance at times? That at times, yes, whereas you'd love to be a morally upright person, the conditions just cannot allow you. I mean,
no, I believe
there's something called psychobiography, that the decisions they make, who they become tomorrow is actually largely influenced by the kind of environment that they have been through. And
it's us to create that environment.
The
youth leaders, in my opinion, the youth leaders have a big role to play.
That's why again it will go back to the fact that it's a process.
Yes, it's a process.
You have to
it is a process,
about it.
but I believe it starts with that.
the people.
Because I wouldn't want to say this, but let me say it the way it is. Let me believe that it is already, let us look at it as a fruit. The upper part is already rotten, but there's still
The bottom.
They're still the bottom.
That statement.
So-
Okay. Let's just hold it right there. That statement. Because let me say the upper part is rotten.
You can still cut off the upper part
Okay.
and eat the lower one.
Okay. Fair enough. Ndugu Brandon Katura. Goal number 13, the area around climate change. And, the targets I'm seeing here with me, building robust maybe infrastructures, setting up, defense mechanisms, like maybe building more trees and, maybe drainage systems and all that. But also, I know that from the Paris Agreement and from the COP26, one of the resolutions was to increase climate financing. I don't know how much Uganda is investing in terms of climate financing, but what I know, as a matter of fact, is that each and every single day I see new, either a road or a new building being constructed, or there is a development happening almost each and every single day. And this comes at the expense of the environment. So do you think that Uganda as a country, because even if you look at the refugees and the crisis that happens in Kasese each time River Nyamwamba bursts its banks, our government seems to be having more of knee-jerk reactions. Kasese is flooding. Okay, let's take their relief. Or let's knee-jerk reactions, not sustainable ways of how to address some of these climate challenges. So, speak to Uganda and its readiness to address the issues around climate change.
Okay. I think first of all, our Ministry of Disaster Preparedness is also like a disaster waiting to happen because most times it's a very reactionary institution in nature.
Yeah.
They have lamented over time about financing and the ability to mitigate it. Second, I think as a country, we are still very low on research and data collection because some of these unfortunate incidents that happen can be forecasted or they are data driven. For example, when it's a rainy season, as a ministry, as a government, we need to know, like people of Kasese should not have to experience flood 3, 4, 5 times. It means that we are not taking any lessons from these disasters. I think that's one of the things that I think I would note. Yeah. The other thing is also to say that we have failed to invest in sustainable climate action technologies in terms of in those communities that are prone to these disasters. We have not invested in technologies as a country that will protect them. Even our housing patterns, you notice as this country is still very poor. You notice where we stay in terms of communities, we don't have clear housing and urban resettlement locations. So you have someone who stays here and the next door is like a warehouse. You have someone staying here and like the next place is like a factory. So that causes its own challenges in terms of like climate action. But also to speak, I think the biggest dilemma, Moses, we have in this country is that we are still vastly very poor. So climate action seems like an abstract concept. It's a white man's problem. And very many black people on the continent say they are not to blame for the issues they are seeing today. When you look at China's contribution to emission, when you look at Russia, when you look at Germany and France, some black people feel like we are being punished for actions of our heavily industrialized nation. So already, and some of those are government actors who feel that way. So you can imagine if someone is saying, why should I cut down on cutting of trees? Get this. I mean, the last meeting, COP26, I think China refused to show up actually. Yes. They boycotted. Yes. Because China is saying we are industrial and that's how people are living. I'm trying to understand your grandmother in Uguru who is getting firewood, how we are going to explain to them to move towards wind energy. Wind energy, just imagine someone in Uguru collecting wind, in Amuru, in Bushem. It's still a little bit of an abstract concept for us, and I'm worried that unless people are economically empowered, you cannot sell this benefit of renewable energy. And I feel like government needs to give massive incentives. You need to give a lot of benefits, tax holidays to people who are pushing this. Like if you have a guy doing a factory in Namang and he's like, me, I'm using biogas. They should even give him a holiday maybe of 30 years. Maybe it can push other people. But if a guy is down there in Soroti and they are collecting firewood, I think it's still a little bit of a challenge. I feel like I know we have the act, like the Environmental Act we have set up. Government has done a good job in setting up authorities that are on paper, they look like but the issue of climate action, I think is something that we need to discuss importantly. Also, I think like you've just alluded to, you look at the recent food issues that we have had, the shortage. We have issues with how we harvest food, and because our my lecturer Ramadan Go, who is now incidentally PS at Ministry of Finance, you said our agriculture was rain-fed and pest-infested. And I think one of the indicators that shows that you're not doing well with your climate management resources is how you even survive, your food availability. So for me, I think it's a very big challenge because like you've now noticed these sudden patterns. It's very hot on some days. So the rate that climate change is upon us, I think the only challenge we have as a country is our ability to relate to it. There's another big debate on whether it is implemented by bigger players or do you start cracking down on individuals who has a bigger footprint on the ecological setup. Do you squeeze government and say, for example, we are not moving by cars anymore? If we woke up and say, let's remove all ministry cars, we would change a lot in terms of emission. Another person could say, if we went for individuals, we go to a committee and say, let's move out with this. So there's also that debate on where does action and change start from? Others, the school of thought is that maybe you crack down on institutions. If you went to parliament and said, guys, cars away, this away, maybe let's go green, let's try to use maybe the iPads, like the times we're talking about iPads, do it with paper, it could cause a change. But at the moment, it's...
So Brandon, now, what way forward? Because whereas the West has contributed, okay, the Western part of the East has contributed largely to the global emissions that we are experiencing today. The fact is that Uganda becomes a victim of their actions. So do you think that Uganda and other African states should have maybe gone into COP to negotiate and say, okay, guys, here's the thing. You've contributed largely to a great percentage of these global emissions. So then you're asking us not to industrialize and not to maybe set up industries, but then what is there for us? Should we have negotiated for maybe an economic benefit rather than us agreeing blindly that, okay, we shall not do this, fossil energies, all these things? I feel like, and I agree with you, research driven. I feel like we go into some of these conferences with really very short in terms of knowledge on what we can reap out of them. And we just end up assenting and agreeing to some things that are not actually very realistic in our domestic sense.
So I agree with you. I think that I think even with these SDGs, every country usually makes what we call a national determinable contribution. Usually you say as Uganda, this is what I'll be able to do in the next 5 years. And I think we embed it in our development plans. My concern is sometimes we set contributions that we are not going to be able to deliver on as a nation. So I think like on this issue of climate change, I know, and there's another challenge, of course, we have the power that the Western world has around the media. When they are pushing an agenda, it will be all over your face, whether it is in movies, series, everywhere, you will see ambassadors. So suddenly when you're cutting trees, you can feel guilty by even like you see a billboard and then you get disturbed. So the fact that they entrain these narratives using media, I feel like sometimes you feel you feel like you're going to be on an island alone. If you woke up and said, my people are not ready to do this, because China took a stand and they're a big player. So I'm wondering if African leaders said, and I feel that maybe at institutional level, maybe African Union, we need to have a binding stand as the African continent. Because while maybe countries like South Africa, Ghana, who are bigger players, have taken maybe some leaps, you still have countries like Burundi who are languishing in poverty. So for them, like even Uganda here, so how do we harmonize that? I feel like at institutional level, like you are saying, maybe to have a player, like on the issues of climate change, is to say that we are at different stages of development, honestly. And I think while guys are at like, they have grown, some of us are still at takeoff, some of the nations are taking off. So I think climate change, I know there's discussion about the future, but it's a little bit worrying because I felt African countries should have negotiated for what works for them now. So even if you're saying, okay, cut 1 tree, maybe plant 4, something like that. But when you tell someone, do away with the trees, and government doesn't give you an alternative, it can be a little bit. And of course, like I said, we don't have technologies to harness the things they were saying. I'm happy at COP26, they actually said they'd even set like a fund aside. If you are claiming you didn't have enough money, there's even going to be money for you. Actually, they're giving a lot of funding to countries which are going to be pro-green. So meaning, of course, now even our government actors knowing the state of corruption in this country, you can apply for a grant because now the money is actually available, but you may not deliver on there. So for me, I think it's still a very big challenge because I even feel like at institutional level, even our head of state, hasn't fully bought into the idea. He still feels maybe it is a Western kind of thing. People trying, like you said, curtailing growth. Because now when you want to put up industries, is when people are telling you, please don't do this. And so I think
wow, amazing. Princess, let me come to you. And the last goal itself, partnerships to achieve all these. I believe that one of the key players that government should partner with are civil society, because of so many reasons. They have access to resources in all dimensions. But Uganda's case is one where civil society organizations, some are closed up to today. Of course, those majorly focusing on areas around governance are the ones who have been frustrated largely by the circumstances. But I think that one way to go about the issue of partnerships is to open the space as much as possible. Let NGOs who have access to funding from maybe United Nations or wherever they can get this money from, bring that pool of money into the country to address some of these, challenges. So the area around partnership, do you think we are taking the right direction? Or maybe because it looks like from my end, we have good partnerships with, for example, China. China is implementing its road belt policy here very well. So I think, yes, we have made some partnerships here and there, but the domestic partnership that should have arisen from the NGOs set up within the country, but also the individual partnerships. How much are individual citizens willing to go to partner with government in terms of realizing some of these very good, goals? So speak to the aspect of partnership.
So first of all, partnerships means we work together to achieve these goals. So there's different partners that we could partner with for each of the goals.
Yeah.
I could say zero poverty. We have a number of NGOs in the country that are really willing to work towards this, and they have the funding. They have everything that is necessary that we as a country might not have. But then there's the issue that the people are not even aware of what's going on. Like you come and be like, oh, we are going to work with GIZ and they're going to address the issue of, gender-based violence in a particular village in the country. But then you come to the people, you didn't talk to them, you didn't go through the local government, you didn't go through the LC. So I believe even the government itself, it's the one that established the local government. But there's a habit of believing there's like a hierarchy within the government of we are above them. We don't really have to talk to the people and find out what they want. Let's just go and do what we know is needed.
Yeah.
So people are a key aspect in development. If we are the reason why development needs to even happen in the first place.
That's true.
So if we can't go through the LC1s, LC2, all of them, and talk to them or find out what are the issues that are of concern, like what issue are you facing as a community that needs to be addressed first, so that we can maybe work with, let me say, the GIZ, Red Cross, or anything, depending on what their issue is.
Yeah.
So we need to first address the aspect of people. The people need to be the drivers of development. They need to know what's going on. They need to be aware that, so this is why you need to work on an issue like this. This is what you need to do. Or could you give us your ideas of what you want to do that you believe will better this issue? Like agricultural aspect. We all know that most of the reason as to why our agriculture is not that high is because we have low technology. We are not doing it at a higher production pace. So it's more like, okay, talk to the farmers that are in the business already. Why aren't they producing highly? Why are they producing at a low scale? Do they have market? Why do they think maybe that the government is ignoring them or issues like that? So people need to be the first thing before we think about partnering. So if the people are they should be the first partner before any other people that get involved in that.
Wow, amazing. Allan, let me come to you. Goal number 2, zero hunger. Uganda is known to be a food basket. At least our backbone is agriculture. And even from the government's approach, they seem to focus on agriculture in terms of, building institutions. We have NADS, we have the Operation Wealth Creation, and all this is centered around how can we commercialize agriculture, how can we have the Ugandans who are in this particular sector producing more. So it looks like in terms of achieving zero hunger, we have actually moved a step forward. I think the issue that remains is what Brandon mentioned, the issues around maybe food security, that yes, we produce so much, but if you're to look at how we secure this food, the issues around value addition is still, I think, wanting in that regard. Because if, for example, I think about 3 months ago, Kenya stopped us from exporting
Maize.
our maize into their country. So those are issues around, value addition of our agricultural products. Yes, we have sufficient food within the country, but issues around value addition, issues around food security are still wanting. So what do you think could be the way forward regarding how can we have a sustainable zero hunger agenda where there is food at 24/7? Is it around addressing the issue of food security? Is it around value addition? Should we have more refrigerators so that, our food doesn't go bad? But also because this is somehow aligned with the aspect of the high prices of commodities that we are experiencing today. And part of the commodities are actually food items. So if we are a country that boasts of being, a food basket, then I think that even under such crisis that the globe is facing, we should be able to have shock absorbers, because in any case, we have in surplus. So the issue around zero hunger.
Talked about zero hunger. I recalled one of my friends at campus. Guys, there is hunger at campus. So when someone talks about zero hunger, you see it in a perspective of someone has totally nothing to take. But if you're observant in this country, people are starting to have irregular meals. Talked about the issue of prices. The issue of prices doesn't only go just to the commodity, but there are underlying factors. How you produce, the factors of production. As the prices of certain commodities increases, even the factors of production. It means those who are not deep in economics, but those who have done economics know that when some factors of production have increased in their pricing, then at the end of it all, at the end of the chain, the price will be high.
Yeah.
So hunger these days is not because food is not produced, but it's because the price of the food and how much people have. If this goal is to be achieved, several things must be addressed. Yes, we've seen that we have land, it is arable, we have some good climate, we have everything ready for food production. But in whose hands is the land? And how well are they utilizing the land? I can tell you that in my home area, people plant a lot of tea for commercialization. Little they earn from that tea. They then go to the market to buy food because they need money. At first they planted tea, but because of I can't say fake, but policies that do not support the producers, the people are becoming hungry not because they are not working. People are becoming hungry not because they're not producing food. But if my parent is producing matoke, selling it for my tuition, I have to come to campus, then buy food. How much do I pay for the food? If the world is to focus on zero hunger, they should now turn their, whatever opinion they have away from production. Production is possible, I can say. What affects the production to a level that a student at Makerere University or any other university has decided or has in his heart come to consensus that lunch,
I'm fasting.
Yeah, I'm fasting. So
I've been forced
it's a
to fast.
mindset. They say lunch is a mindset, supper is a mindset. So gradually, if such a student, someone who is studying, some of them have, get some money from the government, they can't afford food. Now imagine someone who doesn't have the land, who doesn't produce anything, who doesn't have a job. That person will be hungry in the perspective of real hunger.
Yeah.
So what the government can do, we appreciate the initiatives, but they should look deeper into how the people produce, how much they incur in production, and then the returns.
Yeah.
My father produces coffee. Coffee is a cash crop. At home, when we returned to coffee, there are some food crops that we left, which means to a larger extent, we depend on purchases. When I look at how much we earn from our plantation, vis-a-vis how much my father spends on us, the students, some of us who are studying, buying our own food, buying their own food, then the question comes to pricing, the question comes to the benefits by the farmer. Agriculture is the backbone, I agree, and it has been, because any agrarian economy depends on agriculture. But how much recently the government is now running from, food crops to cash crops. My father did from food crops to cash crops. Now we buy food, I'm telling you. But at Makerere, at some point, lunch will become a myth.
Yeah.
So
meaning the issue around zero hunger, in your point or in your argument, we must address the factors of production.
Factors of
because
production.
it is them that
And
therefore
the cost of the factors.
Yeah.
Maybe just to add in a bit.
Sure.
I think on top of that is to also mention that one of the issues why we have issues around the cost is because of our post-harvest management systems. I think it's still a very big challenge.
Okay.
We get a crisis with food numbers because I think about 60% of our food is lost just from how we manage harvesting. So I think if that was addressed, or if we had, whether I don't know if it's like district silos or community silos, having transportation, maybe we would lose less food and maybe we would not have such much scarcity. I think that's something that government need to look, and I think the parish development model, I think, hints about it, about government trying to streamline management. I also remember in economics, sometimes we are told that government should have the capacity to buy. You need to give ready market. One of the issues we have is market in this country. So someone produces maize, then there's no one to buy. Then there's like an overflow of maize, then we're trying to see where to export it. So government will give people a guarantee that a farmer gets into farming. I've seen Kabushenga appearing in front of committees. We're having these issues about investors. I think government also alternative is like to create a buffer for farmers to know that when his dad gets into that kind of business, he's guaranteed that he will get money out of it. Then the last thing I think also around issues of food security is we need to adjust our land tenure systems, I think. We still have issues around land and its productivity and how much influence government can have. Or even Uganda, you may be here doing your things. If they wake up and Kabaka wants that place, you may have, exactly. So I think also, and also interesting to notice that women are the biggest victims every time you have women and children, statistically, are people who suffer the most from food insecurity. So I think government should also be very deliberate to allow women to own land, whether it goes for a cultural shift, whether it is religious, because in most communities, women can't own land. When they actually till, it is like renting. You have to talk to a patriarchal man to allow it to use it.
Even the pay has to be lesser than
exactly. So, because the women are the ones who normally stay home, they nurture homes. So I've noticed that it's one of the biggest challenges we have. Most of the places, even if a man owned it and it was unproductive, and the woman said, I have something I wanted to do, the man will say no. He would rather have it like, I'll give an example. In the West where I come from, we are very big on cattle rearing. Someone can have a square mile of just cows hopping from one place to another, and that's what he wants to see. In terms of productivity, it becomes an issue. So I hope that government can also be deliberate about in the future to align, for example, even the beneficiaries of the parish development model. We say for every 10 communities, at least 6 landowners should be women, or maybe 4, so that you have that kind of balance. Because at the moment, we still have issues around the land in this country, and this is partly the reason why we actually also get these problems.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you. That, of course, by all means was very elaborate. Ritah, let me come to you. The issue around good health and well-being, goal number 3. COVID, in its sense, did expose so many of these health challenges and health gaps that exist within the country, because we saw that we had to move towards house quarantine, because our medical infrastructure could not hold, the number of cases. So, but also if you go to the Ministry of Health and check out their statistics, they tell you that malaria still, contributes to a very large percentage of the country's maybe annual or daily deaths. So it looks like around the issue of health, we are still largely lacking. Speak about the access to healthcare in itself. I think now government has moved to level 2, the parish. I'm not sure if there are parish health centers, but what I know is there are sub-county health, level 3, if I'm to call it.
Centers.
Yeah. So the issue around good health and well-being, do you think our country is moving towards the right direction regarding achieving this? You can speak to the health budget and, other, how are scientists being encouraged maybe to practice their profession? Is there an extra or maybe wage that encourages them? Because what I know is that during the COVID-19 era, which we are still in, we saw so many of these nurses coming out to demonstrate that we put our lives on the front line, but we haven't been paid our salaries and all these things. So our government regarding good health and well-being, are we moving in the right direction?
Well, regarding health and well-being, the government has played its, maybe let me call it its vital role. It has tried to play its vital role, but the major actors in the health facilities or in the health situation itself are NGOs. Most NGOs are the ones that are actually pushing for the well-being and the health of the people in Uganda. Because when we go back down there to the health centers, most of the health centers, the facilities given in the health centers are non-government organizations. But how long will these NGOs keep funding the health and well-being of the people in Uganda? So basically, I believe that the health and well-being of the people in the country is highly ignored when it comes to maybe budgeting. I feel like it's highly ignored. Like they do not give a bigger view to the well-being because of the fact that the loud NGOs are there. Well, when you go back to for example, in areas of Gulu, you look at the health centers, and most of them are funded by NGOs, USAID particularly. Most of them are funded by NGOs. So basically, if we do not have NGOs in the country, if all those people backlashed and they left the country, our health and our medical facilities would come to zero.
Would collapse.
Yes, it would collapse. And when you look at the number of doctors in those institutions themselves, it's very small. You'll find on a maternity day, like maybe let's say a Wednesday, but on a maternity day, you'll find about 100 young pregnant mothers waiting, and the doctor that is supposed to work on them they're about 2 or 1, or one will decide not to come because they are not paid. These people are also not encouraged to go to their workplaces. They do not have the zeal to go and work because they know they're not going to be paid. So I feel that if there's more funding that is injected into the health and medical system, then the country would actually thrive when it comes to health and well-being of people, because that is the problem. Actually, these NGOs at some point in time wanted to pull away because most of the work is
being
left
done by
to them. Yes,
and government is not doing
it's
much.
not doing much. They are relaxed.
Yeah, I think
Because
just
they know
a
these people
clear
are there.
indication is the report that we saw last week regarding the mental illness and the mental state of many Ugandans, that 14 million of Ugandans are actually mentally ill. I think that is a clear demonstration that the issue around our health sector is still wanting, but also records around malaria, around mortality rates still indicate that much more needs to be done. Yeah, fair enough. Comrades, our time is fast spent. We have 2 minutes to be off this show. So I'll give each and every one of you a single minute to give your final remarks, your last words. It could be a recommendation. It could be, a criticism, maybe in a particular goal agenda, or just your general overview and remarks. So I'll begin with Brandon, then come to Princess as I move towards the side.
Yeah, so I think that as a country, we still need to have honest discussions about the issues that affect us, and also importantly decide how we want to address those issues. I think that secondly, we need to also be very intentional as a country on the things that we have ratified or we want to do. We need to be able to see these in the operations of our country as a whole and as a society. And so moving forward as Uganda, we need to look back how far we have come from 2015 and see what changes we can be able to make and what we need to do different if we are going to realize Agenda 2030. And I also think it's also okay for us to realize that we will not achieve all the 17 goals, but we can be able to measure success and the milestones from each of these individual 17 goals. So moving forward, I think I would call for more introspection and meditation as a country on how far we have gone and what we need to do moving forward for the next about 6 years or so. Thank you.
Wow, amazing. Princess.
So I believe as a country, we need to involve all the human aspects in development, because humans are the drivers of development. That means the youth, the women, and the men as well. So without them, there's no development. We need to realize that every single person plays a key role at achieving these sustainable development goals. So everyone should be involved, even those who believe, I don't think I could play any big thing, anything small that can be done as a step towards achieving the goals. Even the discussions about them, the debates about them play a role in achieving them or taking a step towards achieving them. So as young people, I urge young people to work together, read more on issues like this, and to work more and work together to achieve the sustainable
Amazing.
development goals.
Thank you. Allan?
Yeah, my recommendation is on the administrative perspective. How the SDGs move down to the real person. We have local governments, we have NGOs, we have several players in this thing of implementation of SDGs. So if the best way to achieve them is to streamline how best they are implemented. So I recommend that the government looks deeper into how the local governments have taken initiatives in adopting the SDGs in their own plans, because we know local governments at district levels, sub-county levels, adopt different plans. So however much our government has adopted a national development plan, within, including the SDGs, local governments also need to include them as much as the central government does. So if we do that, I believe it will have the real impact that we desire. Yeah.
Thank you. Ritah?
Well, I would say that knowledge is king. And the problem with Africa, the problem with Uganda is lack of knowledge. And if we realize that we lack knowledge and there is illiteracy, that people do not understand some of these things, then my call will be onto the leaders down there to bring these issues to the natives in a language they can understand. Because we are all using English right now, but someone out there cannot formulate a sentence in English, but have ideologies and can actually impact on the community. So I believe that if we bring these things to the people in a language they can understand, then we can understand what problems they are actually facing and understand what is going on in their lives. So I believe major stakeholders will be able to actually implement and strategize on the problems facing the country today.
Wow, amazing. Thank you, Comrade Brandon, Comrade Inshuti, Comrade Allan, and Comrade Ritah for sparing the time to be with us on this week's edition of the Youth Roundtable. It's always amazing to have brilliant and intelligent minds. Comrade Rashid and the technical team, thank you very much for ensuring that our viewers get this show right on time. You have heard it all. I will not add much. All I can say is we have 6 years to 2030. Will Uganda be able to achieve the 17 Sustainable Development Goals? Well, give us your opinion, but also only time can tell. From us to you, it has been amazing having you on this show. Until next week, same time, same place. Bye-bye.